Chapter 1. Achtung. I must have slipped into a parallel dimension. It was 1992, and the sound coming from the speakers was all at once alien, and yet somehow deeply familiar, as if it were speaking directly to my soul. I was alone in my apartment, listening over and over again to this odyssey of the psyche, as the twilight peered in through the sliding glass door directly in front of me. It even sounded like he said my name. How could that be? It can't be. But it is, I thought, and then said aloud, how is that even possible? It was the third track from the critically acclaimed new album, and as I held the CD in my hands, looking for answers, I wondered with astonishment. My lyrics were coming out of his mouth. My head began to reel as my heart was healing from ending a 2-year engagement. This album was supposed to be breakup medicine, but instead it was banging at the door of my memory, reminding me of something lost in time. I stared at the cover art on the CD in my hands, reading carefully, tracing with my fingers. Achtung, it said. I felt intrigued. How interesting that an Irish band would use the German word for attention to title their new release. Attention, baby. Well, they most certainly had mine now, more than ever before. I stared into space as my mind drifted back to where it all started, so many years ago, in Frankfurt, West Germany. It was cold, so cold that it crept into your soul. I remember the scents in the air, the buildings, whitewashed, all so close together, each visually blending into the next, ad infinitum. The sky was so overcast with shades of gray that it would cry to wash away the pain of the Second World War. There was a feeling of desolation. All I wanted to do was return stateside, back to New Orleans. But that wouldn't happen for a while. This was Frankfurt, the largest industrial city in West Germany, and it was my new home, away from home. But it didn't feel that way. It felt nothing like home. It felt nothing like New Orleans, a place where the air was so thickly sweet, you could taste the water droplets on your tongue while floating along through the summer heat. Magic would rise like mist from the city streets, inspiring you to chase the moon, then leaving you to dance with the moonlight. I moved to Frankfurt with my family in the summer of 1978 to become an American dependent living overseas, commonly referred to as a military brat. This term would somewhat define part of my earthly existence for years to come. We, my mother, sister, and I, left New Orleans in August of that year to spend time with my family in Kentucky before embarking on our long journey to Frankfurt. It was there that my father awaited our arrival. My father was in the Air Force before joining the Army Corps of Engineers and had been stationed in Korea for a year when I was 4 years old. When he returned, there was a strain on his relationship with myself and my mother. My sister Malaya was an infant, so she wasn't directly affected by his absence. When he rejoined the family, the distance between my parents continued to grow, ultimately becoming a chasm that none could cross, but they stayed together. When I say he awaited our arrival, it was a cold and somewhat emotionless waiting, just like my first experience of Frankfurt would be. He had gone 2 months ahead to get settled, begin working, and to find a place for us to live. He began the enormous task of in-processing to get all of the paperwork completed for each of us and started working. He did seem to like it there, giving us good reports of the city and his experiences. These descriptions were nothing like the Frankfurt that I met in September when the rest of us got there. There were nights so dark and frigid that my shadow would follow me home to make sure I arrived safely at my destination, with my angels ever vigilant. I always felt that I was being followed by something in Frankfurt, and as it turns out, I was. There was some kind of destiny waiting for me there that had its own designs, and though I participated in this creation, it would stop at nothing until they played out like a never-ending song. This song of love, created by destiny, was at times like a ballad, soft and sweet, whispering my name. Then suddenly, without warning and a roll of thunder, it would become a rock anthem, kicking ass and taking names. As if that weren't enough, it would transform itself again into a symphony, played by an orchestra so vast that choirs of angels could be heard singing. Driven by inspiration, it was the soundtrack for my life, but I digress. This is how the story goes. Growing up in New Orleans had taught me a few things. How to be soft and to love, how to cry, and how to be tough on the outside and warm on the inside, like melting snow. I knew how to keep people out and at a distance when necessary, but nothing prepared me for the education that I was about to receive on the world stage in Frankfurt. I remember riding the U2 line back and forth from Frankfurt am Main to Nieder-Eschbach, where so much of my contemplation and musings began. I stared out of the window and disappeared into my sunlit memories of New Orleans and Kentucky, both places that I called home. At times, I would lose myself in the scenery, and my vast imagination filled with daydreams of beautiful things. Occasionally, I would break contact with my other world abruptly to find a German person staring at me. This was a very disconcerting sensation, and in the beginning, being only 14, I felt embarrassed or mortified. But after a time, I just felt angry. Why couldn't they just let me disappear into my deep imaginings of far-off places where I was surrounded by love? Why did they have to bring me crashing back from my secret paradise with the stairs? Often I was absorbed in one of my notebooks, passing the time by writing poetry or prose to feel some cold, icy stare tingling at the edges of my senses. It was a culturally accepted German custom, and there was nothing that I could do except become the better of the two in the stare-down. So I did. I figured if you wanted to invade my inner world when not invited, then you were going to have to deal with the energetic consequences thereof. So I stared back, and I stared them down every time, unless I was too tired or just didn't care. I became the queen of the stare-down contest, and no one ever could remove my crown. I rocked it. As time passed, it became just a normal part of riding the U-Bahn, and like background noise, faded into the oblivion from whence it came. My first taste of Germany was the Frankfurt Flughafen, but I don't much remember it the way that I remember saying goodbye at the New Orleans airport to my friends. They came to see me off, and we hugged goodbye with tears in our eyes, not knowing if or when we would see each other again. The Flughafen, however, was monumentally large by comparison, crowded, and filled with signs I couldn't read, and people speaking in languages that I couldn't understand. The information overload was paramount when we arrived. Though many of the German people were helpful and kind, some of the people, however, were abrupt or plain rude, and tried to make us feel that we were less than they, most likely due to having witnessed Americans who lacked graciousness. For the most part, however, as a whole, the German people were some of the most beautiful, focused, methodical, and practical people that I had ever encountered up to that point, and I grew to love them and to love my new home very dearly. The first place that I do remember lodging in Europe was the Ambassador Arms Hotel, a somewhat smallish military welcoming place for new arrivals, with an underwhelming awning that belied the entire idea of welcome. We stayed there a short time before my father came to take us to our new home, a townhouse in a little village called Nieder-Eschbach. It was there that I would spend the next 8 years of my life, learning, growing, being, and becoming what I was destined to be. Our new home was stark, much like the austerity of the whitewashed buildings that we passed on the way there, and decorated only by army green, surplus furniture. It left something to be desired, coupled with horsehair carpet on the floor in a pale reddish-purple color that left you wondering what color it really was. It was a duplex adorned in almost none of our own belongings, because it was 1/3 the size of our former home. None of us could believe that my father actually thought that it was large enough for the lot of us. The foyer was less than modest, and boasted a tiny half-bath off to the right, and a door of frosted glass that led to the rest of the house. The kitchen was almost a shotgun style, with barely enough room for one person to move around, let alone 3 or 4. It was a virtual nightmare trying to seat everyone around the table to have a meal together. But when you did, you were intimately settled in for the duration. It took on a strange warmth as time passed because of the many talks and arguments had there. There was an unassuming living room and dining area with a lovely glass door and a large picture window looking out onto the back patio. This was framed by a lush, rich, vivid green yard surrounded by trees and living things, with an 8-foot stone wall that separated us from our neighbors. At the far right corner of the yard, there was a hidden gate that led down a quiet path to the farms and fields of rolling emerald, almost as far as the eye could see. I spent many hours walking down this path through the countryside, feeling the magic of the spirits of nature, while my hair danced in the wind behind me. The first floor of the townhouse was given its mood by overpowering creaky wooden stairs, one set ascending to the second level and the other descending to the basement. Each floor had its purpose, with the ground level being utilitarian. Upstairs there were 3 bedrooms and 1 bath that looked onto the street that harbored a church, with my room being the first, immediately to the left, at the top of the stairs. The master bedroom was next to mine, where my parents slept and carried on their silent war with each other behind the stone wall. There was a small balcony off of the master bedroom, overlooking the backyard that doubled as an escape route from my window. It was situated close enough to the neighboring garage to jump to the roof and then to the ground with relative ease. My younger sister's room was located catty-corner to mine, next to the bathroom. At night, all the windows and doors were covered by the most amazing invention ever, the rouladen. It was a thick wooden series of slats that were pulled down in the evening, creating privacy, dark, and quiet. In the morning, the rouladen was pulled up inside the wall, allowing what little sun there was to stream through the windows and doors, inviting in the light of the new day. My room and the basement were my havens from the world and the family, when I needed time to sleep in the former and unwind in the latter. The basement had a second full bathroom and a laundry room, obviously built before the war, that also served as a bomb shelter. Turning left at the bottom of the stairs behind a door under the living area, there was an extremely large family room that gave me respite from everything. Though it was often cold, I would dig in there downstairs when I needed to sing or listen to my music loudly to avoid disturbing the family. Because the walls and floors were stone, you couldn't hear a thing from room to room. I felt at times that my own room was almost tomb-like in its silence. My twin-sized bed was snuggled in next to the radiator and underneath the east-facing picture window, where I could look out and see the sunrise, other houses, and the fields of plenty with their pretty little rows lined up for harvest time.